We have an atypical schedule in a couple of regards this semester. One of them is our very early start time, which, as a couple of people remarked this morning, the one good thing about it is you really don't have to worry about getting parking, I wouldn't think, this early in the morning, so that's a good thing. I usually get here around 6:45, 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's pretty quiet on campus that early, and then things pick up rather significantly. But in order to get this class into the schedule, given how all of our rooms are used this semester, this early time slot was the only time that afforded us the opportunity to meet. We also are here just from 8 to 9:15, so we have 75 minutes of class time twice a week, so we will have to move very expeditiously through the material to make sure we cover everything this semester. I think we'll be able to do that. As we get started, the first couple of class periods, I don't know that we'll be doing a lot of things that will be typical from that point forward in this semester. A lot of our class sessions will be writing code together, looking at source code, talking about the syntax of the ABAP programming language and other things of that sort. But for the first couple of class periods, we have to lay some foundation before we can jump into that. But the focus of this course is pretty straightforward. This is a programming course focused on the ABAP programming language. I'll explain more of how that language is used and what its intent is as we go along here. But we have had a lot of ETSU students over the years take this course and then go on to become professional ABAP developers. I've had a lot of students tell me during and after the class that they don't really enjoy programming, but they actually found ABAP to be pretty fun. It's not that hard of a language to be able to do some very powerful things with, and so my hope is that by the time we get to the end of this semester, you will have added another programming language to your repertoire, and one that in the future may help you go out and secure a very good job. But beyond the goal of covering just the ABAP programming language, there are a number of other things that this course is intended to provide you with. And I just realized, I guess, that our screen here is kind of high. Oh well, I'll try and fix that for next time. But the goal here is to give you knowledge of a kind of programming language that you probably have not seen in any of your other programming language courses here at ETSU, which is the idea of working in a programming language that is embedded in an enterprise information system. One of the things that you will find that perhaps is atypical of this class is you don't have to worry about bringing a USB drive to class. You don't have to worry about where you save your files and other things of that sort, because all of your programming artifacts are saved in the enterprise information system. And we'll talk about how that works and as we go along here. But a lot of the things about developing in ABAP are true for enterprise information system based development languages other than ABAP. So this will give you an exposure to that. We will also be developing in an established, robust, and complex environments. One of the things that you probably have talked about in other classes, but I don't know if you've had opportunity to use extensively, is the idea of working with a data dictionary or similar structure that documents existing artifacts in a system that you're developing in. Well, in ABAP, we make extensive use of the ABAP dictionary because writing programs of any level of complexity will likely have you leveraging things that are already a part of the development environment. And so learning to work with those established data structures and enterprise information systems tools is something that is a key facet of this course. Give you experience in developing within an established framework. One of the things that is true of this class that certainly would not be true of, let's say, for example, a Java programming class. You could not write a Java program, at least not very easily, that would take down an enterprise information system. You can do that with an ABAP program. You can do that just by naming something inappropriately and corrupting a system data object. So this idea of your being a developer in an environment where there are many, many other developers present and there are artifacts that have been created previously is likely going to be a new scenario for you. Certainly one of the things that is true with programming in general is it's very hard learning your first language, it's less hard learning your second language, and then as time goes by and you learn more and more programming languages, it tends to get a little bit easier for you. So this is, by virtue of the prerequisites of this course, certainly none of your first efforts at programming. And so one of the things that is true is this course will be taught as a ABAP programming class for people with programming skill and knowledge. And we'll make reference to things in other programming languages, but we won't, for example, take an entire class period and talk about looping structures and how you can work with looping structures. We'll introduce the syntax and then move very quickly into how that can be applied in ABAP programming to accomplish needed skills. We will do object-oriented programming. ABAP is an unusual language in that you can write both procedural ABAP and object-oriented ABAP, and both of them have their place in professional practice, and so we will do that this semester. We will start with procedural ABAP, but fairly quickly, presumably before midterms, we'll be transitioning to object-oriented ABAP as well. We will do a lot of database programming, meaning we'll do a lot of programs where you extract information from a database, manipulate it somewhere in your program, perhaps put information back into a database and perform other database manipulation. So you'll get an opportunity to practice some of your writing of database queries and other things of that sort. Mentioned data dictionary a few moments ago, so you'll get opportunity to learn how to work with data dictionaries. And then we'll do some event-driven programming, which is the idea that your control flow is determined by things that the user clicks on the screen, or other user interaction that happens at runtime influences what the code actually does. Certainly one of the things that this course prides itself on is giving you knowledge of ABAP to facilitate potential future job opportunities. Let's talk about that for a second. There are a number of universities in the United States that are members of the SAP University Alliances program. All of you have experience with some of the resources that come here to ETSU as a part of our membership in that program. How those universities use those resources varies rather significantly. The number of universities that are teaching ABAP programming here in the U.S., from best I have been able to determine, is fewer than a dozen. So there are not a lot of universities that teach ABAP programming. There are not a lot of universities that teach ABAP programming to the depth that we do. So one of the advantages our students have had going out on the job market is a lot of companies are looking for ABAP developers. Very few university students have that experience. We have placed developers at Eastman Chemical, at Oak Ridge National Laboratories, at Y12. Ironically enough, the University of Tennessee loves our graduates because they run SAP for infrastructure, and they've hired a large number of our developers over the past few years. And there are other companies from outside of this area that recruit developers here as well. It is a very, very atypical body of knowledge for a student to have graduating from college, and almost not a year goes by when we don't place several programmers at those different organizations that I have mentioned. So one of the nice benefits of this course is if you really enjoy ABAP development and focus on developing skill in it, there are good job opportunities, and I want to emphasize that, really good job opportunities that come from this. Beyond that, some of you may want to work in the SAP ecosystem, but not necessarily be a developer. When you talk to people that work with SAP, one of the statements that you'll often hear is the people who really understand the system are the people who know how to develop in the system. And so this course will give you that level of confidence, even if you don't go on to become a developer. As an example of what I'm talking about, this is an email that I got, I guess at this point it's about 5 years ago. We've been teaching ABAP here at ETSU since around 2010. And this particular student took the course and took a job at Eastman Chemical, who has hired a large number of our graduates. I accepted a job with Eastman to work in their IT financial solutions team. As you might guess, there's a lot to learn very quickly. Since it's been about a year since I wrote any ABAP code, and much of my job will entail supporting ongoing financial operations in SAP through ABAP development, I wanted to ask if you would mind sending me copies of the slide decks from the class as well as copies of the assignment so I can get back up to speed. I would encourage you to keep our class resources. The textbook that we are using for this class is one of the few good ABAP textbooks that are out there. ABAP is a language that, if you said, I want to learn C or C++, and you went on Amazon, you'd find hundreds of books that could help you with that. ABAP, fewer than 25. Probably fewer than 5 of them are any good. If you don't believe me, buy a few of them and read them and see to what degree they make sense to you. So what most companies do is they bring in trainers to train their employees on ABAP development. I will tell you that the resources we use in this class are resources that have been used by me in doing training classes for organizations in this area. I'll also explain as we go along here how it parallels some of the other resources that are available that are much more expensive. But nonetheless, as I'm going to meetings and training here at Eastman, much of my knowledge gained in your course is evident and has been very helpful in the short time I've been here. Even so, Eastman, like any other company, does things their own way, and their implementation of SAP and how they configure things is sometimes very different from what I'd seen in the classroom. And that's a true statement and would be true for any organization you go to work in. We will be working in a typical SAP development environment, but if you go to work for Northrop Grumman, obviously they're going to have their company's resources in the system, and so it's going to look a little bit different than the system that we work with. I want to thank you, Prairie, for this position. I'm already seeing the benefits of my education, technical and functional, in comparison to my peers. I'm in the middle of a crash course on organization structures, and almost all of it was taught to me before thanks to your instruction. So the point of my showing you this has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the fact that what you are going to learn in this class will be potentially extremely career relevant for some of you. Here's another example of one of our graduates. Megan Bradley graduated in 2011. She works at Oak Ridge National Laboratories. She is an ABAP developer. What are your work responsibilities? I work with SAP to create and modify solutions to improve the business services used by researchers and employees throughout the lab. I've done everything from writing the code for a new part of an application to writing test specifications for documentations. Sometimes an error comes up that prevents users from completing a task that they used to be able to do. My job is to read the current code, find the issue, and write the code to fix it. So we have had a lot of graduates go out and get very, very good jobs. And I can tell you that employers in this area contact me regularly with the question, do you have any good ABAP developers? And my hope is that maybe I'll be able to say yes, because all of the current ones I know of have jobs. But maybe some of you will want to take advantage of this, will find this to be enjoyable. And I can tell you the pay for this kind of work is very, very good as well as opportunities for advancement. So that's a little bit of background, but what I really want to do is start getting into the meat of things and start talking about the ABAP programming language. Now, as we go along, please stop me with questions. I will regularly ask you folks questions, and we'll do a lot of things interactive, although that doesn't tend to happen as much the first couple of class periods as we're getting started. But I definitely want you to feel free to stop me whenever you have questions or comments. Any of those at this point this morning? All right, so let's talk about why do we need ABAP, what does it do for us? So here's a scenario. A company goes out and buys an ERP system. ERP systems are not cheap. An installation of SAP ERP will set a company back millions of dollars. And that's just in software licensing. That's not including the hardware to run the system on. That's not including the configuration and setup process. And that's not including the labor to keep it running on an ongoing basis. You're talking a multi-million-dollar investment. But when you buy an ERP system, it does not come to you ready for you to run it. You can't buy it on Monday and start using it on Tuesday. Some of you perhaps have taken the course CSCI 4757 or 5757, Information Systems Implementation, where you look at one aspect of this. Well, some of the options that are available to you, first of all, is there's the idea of what's called personalization. And personalization is something that is typically done by an end user to make it easier for them to use the system. All of you, by virtue of courses you took before this class, should have had some experience playing the ERP simulation game. And I was looking for a whiteboard marker, but it doesn't seem like I have any, so I'll have to bring some next time, but bear with me. Yes, sir? I'll be okay unless things get more technical here. So you're playing ERP sim, and maybe you're involved with company code AA, okay? Well, what you probably did in playing ERP sim is on a variety of screens, you had to type that in. Well, you could actually go into the ERP system and without a lot of complexity, tell the system, hey, anytime you're going to prompt me for a company code, don't, and just automatically fill in AA by default. And there are other things that you can do in the SAP GUI to make it easier for you to get your work done. You can hide the display of certain fields. By default, in our system, we have the full set of menu items available to you, and you can drill down into tens of thousands of different transactions. That's very atypical. Most organizations, you go to work for them, and depending upon your job role, you'll only see a set of those transactions. But you might have noticed there at the very top, there's a favorites folder, kind of similar to favorites in a web browser, where you could actually tag certain transactions and bring them into your favorites folder for easier access on an ongoing basis. All of what I was just describing to you falls into the category of personalization. Very, very commonly done in organizations, but typically driven by the end user, and obviously is very limited in what it can do for us. Configuration is the focus of the information systems implementation class that I referred to a few moments ago. What configuration is taking the existing controls that already exist in the software and setting those to values that will cause the system to behave the way you want it to behave. So this would include things like telling the system how many manufacturing plants you have and where those are located. Telling the system that when you run MRP, here's how you want the MRP evaluation to be done. Those kinds of things are built inherently into the system by the creators of the software because they realize, of course, that companies are going to have to set up the system to work based on the way they want to do business. So companies like SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, and others that create ERP systems create them to be very, very flexible and configurable. That's why you could have a service organization run an ERP system. You could have a research organization like Oak Ridge National Laboratories run an ERP system. You could have a chemical company like Eastman Chemical. You could have a company like the University of Tennessee, which is a higher educational institution. They can all be running SAP ERP, but it works very differently given the context of those organizations through things that have been done in the context of configuration. But here's the thing. Sometimes there are things that you need and want the system to do that you can't accomplish with configuration. There's just no setting in the system that will allow you to achieve what is needed. So the next step is what's called modification. And modification is the idea that you're going to actually go in and change the software to work differently than the way it was designed to work by the individuals who wrote the code. This is sometimes called customization. Modification, customization are synonymous terms, although we want to make sure we realize that they are different than configuration. Configuration, you're using stuff that's already there and you're just setting values. Modification or customization, you're going in and you are fundamentally changing things. If you could envision an SAP transaction screen in the system, and you might say, you know, there's an additional piece of information we want to track in our organization that's very unique to our organization. And so it's not part of what we get out of the box. Well, you can go in and modify that transaction, add new fields, and change the way the workflow works in the system through modification. And that's one of the things that we will do with ERP, with ABAP. Enhancement is the idea that we take the system such as it is, and we don't change any of the existing code, but we add on to it. And that's really what I was describing a moment ago when I said we have a transaction screen and we need all of the stuff that's there, but we need more in addition to that. And so enhancement is something that we will regularly do. So you have modification, where you're going to go in and actually change the core software. And by the way, I'll show you this in a moment. A lot of times when I tell students this, they really don't believe this, but you'll see that it's true. SAP is open source. You can look at the SAP source code You can change the SAP source code and as a result change the way the system works. And I'll show you how to do that this semester, although for obvious reasons we have to be really, really, really careful when we engage in those kinds of activities. So I can either modify what's there, I can enhance what's there but not change, just add to it, or I can engage in customer development, or this is sometimes called custom development. And this is when I create the things that I need inside of my organization because they don't exist at all. Let me give you one example that's fairly well known and doesn't fall into the category of a corporate secret. If you have ever been over to Kingsport and looked at the facilities operated by Eastman Chemical, they have a rather significant rail yard. They do a lot of receiving of products and shipping of products via trains. At the time they adopted SAP ERP, which goes back to the 1980s, there was no functionality in the ERP system to manage rail cars. And so one of the things the IT team did was they developed a rail car management system that would allow them managing train shipments in and out. It would allow them to interface with the purchasing system and the shipping system for sake of specifying shipments coming in and going out. And they created a rail car management system. They did that without touching any of the things that were in the, they didn't change the core functionality. Some of the transactions they enhanced, but a lot of what they did fell into the category of custom or customer development. The really ironic thing is they did this development in the very early days of their life with SAP, and over time SAP had such demand for railcar management software that SAP ultimately built it into the system. And so one of the ongoing debates that the people at Eastman have been looking at is, as they upgrade to the next version of SAP, do they want to continue using their customer-developed railcar management system, or do they just want to convert over and use the standard SAP railcar management system? So many times companies will have needs for functionality that is not a part of the system, and so they have to engage in customer development. In this class, you will learn how to do modification, enhancement, and customer development. Most of what we will do falls into the category of customer development, but the same techniques are used for any of those three methods of development. Now let me ask you a question. Is there any danger associated with any of these particular activities? And if so, what kind of danger could you foresee? Yes, sir.
Well, the first thing that really popped out to me was modification, right? I mean, because if we're going to put out updates, then you've got to modify the stuff that you've done, and depending on how much that is, it could take a pretty long time.
That's extremely insightful for a couple of reasons. Not only that you have to be careful when you're doing it lest you break anything, but the fact that what you are essentially doing now is potentially cutting yourself off from future updates. There have been a number of companies over the years that invested in extensive modification and then were never able to use updates that came out afterwards. And so over time, their system was very, very much out of date because they were unable to patch it and use newer features that were created because of things they had done in modification. So of all of these, I would say that modification is the one that you need to be most careful with. It's kind of the programming equivalent of a chainsaw. I mean, you're going in and cutting on some source code that makes the system work. And if you don't know what you are doing, you can bring the entire system down. Now, my hope would be, of course, that your company has backups and redundancies and things like that. But the reality is, and this has never been done by an ETSU student and hopefully never will, but in the years that we have been teaching this course, there was one instance where a student at another university did something that caused the system to be corrupted, and everything had to be restored, and it was quite a hassle, and some people did wind up losing a portion of their work. In an academic environment, that's not great, probably cost somebody some points in a class. In a corporate environment, that could cost some people their jobs, and it could cause the company to lose a lot of money depending upon how long they are down as a result of the system being down. Yes, ma'am.
Why would you modify something if you could just develop beside it and just tell people to ignore the part that may be redundant for what you developed?
I would suggest that most companies would look at it exactly the way you described and say, why would we ever want to modify this? Is not worth it. But there are those rare instances where companies say, this is critical to us and we have to do it. But more and more companies are trying to just stay away from this, to the point that they won't even consider modification to be a viable alternative. And that's not a bad strategy. But the point is, what SAP does, and what some other companies do, is give you the ability to do this. And it's kind of like, if you want to shoot yourself in the foot, they'll let you shoot yourself in the foot. And I'll show you how this actually plays out and how they warn you about this. But I think the mindset is, you're paying millions of dollars for this software, and if there's something you need the system to do and it can't do it, we can't make the system do everything everybody wants. So if you want to go in and make a modification, have at it. That's kind of the mindset. But it is something that in most organizations, like you said, they just don't even consider it to be an alternative.
And then to what extent can you, since it is object-oriented, to what extent can you abstract the code that you're doing inside of it so that if you do have to make updates, it can go with that modification?
Oh, that is absolutely possible. And there are tools to support change management in a way that ease a company's ability to make updates over time. Let me give you one example. We will talk a little bit this semester about SAP HANA and S4 and some of the changes that brings to the system, particularly in terms of database interaction. Well, with HANA, there are a number of things that you can do in a query to make it more efficient than the way you probably wrote the code historically. So SAP produces tools that will scan through all of your code and list all of your queries that it thinks could be optimized. So there are a lot of things in the system that will really help you over time keep the system updated and current. But your documentation will inherently be an important part of this as well. So the big thing, and I mentioned this before, is that we want to make sure that in our brains we keep the terms configuration and customization distinct. Configuration is what's covered in that other class that some of you may take in the future, some of you perhaps have already taken, whereas customization, customer development, modification, those are the things that we talk about in this class. Modification, enhancement, and customer development all fundamentally use the same workflow. The distinction is, are you creating a program from scratch, which would be customer development? Are you starting with code that was written by an ABAP developer and adding to it? That would be modification and also enhancement. So let's talk a little bit about this. So just as SAP made configuring their system possible through the IMG, through the implementation guide, and if you have worked in, once again, the course I've been referring to, the Information Systems Implementation, you've done extensive work in the IMG for configuration. Their code is written to support modification. So let's talk about this, and let me show you some of this. All source code in SAP ERP is open to customers and can be modified. This is not recommended. You know, that this is not recommended should not be bolded. It should be in like 200-point type and flashing with trumpets and everything else. SAP will tell you, you can modify our code, but we do not recommend that. Well, let's look at what I'm talking about here. And we're going to look at some SAP code, although we're going to do it by navigating in the system in a way different than you will typically do so. So I'm going to run a transaction that takes me into the ability to look at objects and interfaces in the system. And be aware that objects in this context does not necessarily mean objects as an object-oriented programming. It means objects as in bundles of code. So it could be objects or it could be other things of that sort. We are going to look in something called the Business Object Repository, which is where a variety of different coding artifacts are stored as a centralized system repository. And we're going to look at business objects, organizational types, and we're going to see what appears here in a moment, a catalog of various entities that are already in the system. Now, once again, when I say that this can be hard to see, this is an example of it. And you don't necessarily have to see everything that I'm showing to you, but what you're looking at here is different parts of the system that have business code, that have code associated with it. So we have basis components that relates to system administration. You have things related to business intelligence, business warehouse, enterprise portal, so on and so forth. I'm going to open up financial accounting because that's one of the more robust parts of the system. And you'll notice that in here we have some things with this kind of circle next to it. These are entities. They're not necessarily objects, but they're kind of like objects in that they're bundles of related code. And so we have things related to accounts, accounting documents, business areas, companies codes, functional areas, general ledger accounts, ledgers, and so on. And some of this will make a little bit more sense to you depending upon what you have seen in other classes. Well, I'm going to open up the accounting document by double-clicking on it. And you'll notice now I'm looking at a business object called an accounting document, and it has interfaces, key fields, attributes, methods, and events. So that kind of sounds like this is probably an object. And so let's see what we see when I open up methods. And I have some methods that are in red, which is suggestive that they're probably deprecated. And then I have some here, edit document, create, confirm, things that look like methods that you might call on an object. So this kind of looks familiar to us, I would think. But look at this up here at the top. In this version of the SAP GUI, by the way, the SAP designers made some visual changes, and I don't know why, it's just the way it is, but there's like, at the top, that used to be a program button, and it still is a button, but it no longer has a boundary and stuff around it. But I've got that program button at the top. What happens when I click on that? It's going to take a second because I've just asked it to do something that is not necessarily straightforward or easy for it. It has gone in and it has retrieved the source code for the accounting document. This is the ABAP code written by SAP that implements the accounting document. Now, notice, and I realize we don't know a lot about the syntax here, but you can probably figure out what's comments. Do not change is on line 2. Line 14, do not change. There's all kinds of places throughout this where you see notes about do not change. You see these kind of cryptic names for different things, and we're going to have to get used to this because some of this relates to German, because SAP is a German company and the programmers that work for them are German speakers, and so some of those are abbreviations of German words. But this is a source code for an accounting document. So now the question is, well, suppose I wanted to change it. Right now, and it might be hard to see by way of the projector, but this code is on a pale blue background. When I'm looking at code on a pale blue background, that means that I am in display mode. Well, I can toggle back and forth between display mode and change mode, or display mode and edit mode, by means of the icon on the far left on that second row that looks like a pair of glasses with a pencil. So you can understand the metaphor there. A pair of glasses is to display, the pencils to change. So if I want to toggle between those modes, I click on this. Watch what happens. Make repairs in foreign namespaces only if they are urgent. Okay, this is SAP telling you you are potentially getting ready to shoot yourself in the foot. Only do this if it's really urgent for you to shoot yourself in the foot. Okay? So you say, okay, check mark. But now SAP is not going to just take your word for this. I emailed all of you before class a developer key. And we'll tell you more about that developer key, if not today, then in our time together on Wednesday. A developer key carries with it certain privileges and rights in the system. The system now is actually asking me for, it says you are not registered as a developer. That's because I have not yet put in my developer key, because I want to do it together with you as part of our class walkthrough. So it wants me to put in this field right here my developer key. Now, here's the thing. When I put that in and press enter, it's going to come back and say, you are not authorized for this level of change. And that's true for all of the developer keys that I have and you have as well, because our hosting site does not want us going in and cutting into these system level objects. But if you work for an organization, someone in your organization would have developer keys or have the ability to generate developer keys that they could give you, that you could put in here and click continue, and it would let you then go in and change the source code. What's that?
It's like nuclear code.
It kind of is. You know, it's the equivalent of here's the keys, please don't blow anything up. But so this is literally the only protection. You know, anybody in your organization, depending upon how you have things secured, could run some of the transactions we're going to do this semester and create some programs, but eventually they're going to run into this, put in the developer key. And this is what keeps people that should not be doing development out of actually being able to disrupt the system. So we'll close this down, or we'll go back to display mode. But the bigger point I wanted you to understand is this is the actual source code. Now, this is not the entirety of the source code. This is one piece of it. But notice this is too. What I love about SAP is they document things like crazy. And they have what's called SAP notes. You can look them up in the system, or you can look them up by way of a web browser using Google. And so you'll notice that they want you to understand, and you notice these numbers aren't the same on every one of these lines, but there's reference to these notes. So notice if I go out here and I do SAP ERP note, And let's look at my source code here. 669636. 669636. 669636. Enter. That's interesting. Normally, you'll find a web page that goes right to the note that you're entering. It could be that note is one that's not commonly used. Later in the semester, I'll show you how to actually navigate into the notes system formally. But most time you can get there by way of just a Google search. But what SAP has done is they have put lots of comments in the code. They have put lots of notes which go back and document more exhaustively what's going on. And this is what ABAP code looks like. And give us a few weeks and you'll be able to understand all of this. We've got a case statement with, depending upon what the value is of a particular field, we execute certain conditional code. We're doing some function calls here. Not that complex to understand what's going on once we learn a little bit of the ABAP syntax. So this is an example of if I'm going to go in and actually change that code, that would be modification. Now let's talk about enhancement, because enhancement is really interesting. What SAP said was we understand that sometimes people may need to go in and modify our code. And so they give us that option. But the other thing that they did is they wrote their program in a really, really interesting way. You know how you can write a program and different languages will have different syntax for this, but you can include code from another file in your program. Well, what the SAP developers did is this. They wrote their program such that, here's the program, and we're getting ready to start the program. And before the program starts, it makes a call to a source code file. And if the source code file is there, it executes that. If it's not, it just skips that and keeps going. And all throughout their program, they have these calls to what are called user exits. Well, user exits give you the ability to enhance the code without changing what SAP wrote. In other words, if you like the way a particular thing functions, but you say, before it does what it does, it'd be really good if it made this assignment. Well, you can find the user exit that runs before that code snippet, write your code, and it will run in the fashion we just described. So let me explain to you how this works. And we're going to go at code in a totally different way this time, okay? We can do what I'm about to show you with any transaction in the system, okay? So this is something you might want to play around with on your own at some point. So let's say we wanted to make some changes to the sales order process. So I go in logistics, sales and distribution, sales, order, create, okay? Depending upon what courses you've taken and things of that sort, maybe you've run this transaction before. This allows you to create a sales order for a particular customer. Very, very straightforward SAP transaction. Well, here's something that you probably haven't messed around with before. Down here in the bottom right of the screen, I don't know that there's a particular name for this, but in the system tray area, there's one of these items that has a downward arrow on it. If you click on that, it pulls up this menu right here. And let me see if I can get that on the screen a little bit better, given our resolution issues here. So if I click on this, so it tells me I'm in system AB4, I'm in client 413. I'm user ZN-001. I just ran transaction VA01. Here's the response time and other things that I really don't care about. But notice this right here. The name of this program is SAP MV45A. Everything that you before have thought of as a transaction is actually a program. SAP ERP, when you get right down to it, is a database with a whole bunch of programs that support transactions on that database that empower our workflow. So what we are looking at on the screen right now is actually program SAP MV45A. So now that we know that, and you could look this up for any transaction in the system just by running the transaction and looking down here in program. So now that we know that's the name of the program, we're going to go someplace that we will go a lot this semester, but I'm not going to talk about it in detail today, which is the ABAP Workbench. The ABAP Workbench allows me to pull up programs to edit or create new programs, and you see it has already spotted me here, SAP MV45A, and that's because I pulled this up yesterday when I was checking some things in the system. So over here, if I double click on this, which is the name of the program, and give it a few seconds, here's that program. This is the transaction code for creating a new sales order, and you can see it's a few hundred lines long. See if I can scroll through it here. You can see, and in fact, to really try and understand this, you really would have to chase through a lot of files, because all of this include, and this right here, that's another bundle of source code. And if we spoke German, we'd probably understand what these documentation words over here meant. Anybody speak German?
Working on it.
Working. Do you know any of those words right there?
No.
Okay. You know what's that?
Conditioning.
Yeah, this is probably something along those lines. And if you ever really wanted to know, you can like copy and paste this into Google and it'll tell you, but we won't take time to do that.
Only when my grandma was mad at me.
I did actually one time have a student who was from Germany, and it was really kind of cool. He could translate this for us. But what I want you to notice is this right here. Okay, we start the transaction, module, pool, zur, good grief. I don't know. I don't know if German people can play Scrabble or not, but they'd have to have a really big board because they have just the hugest words. But notice this right here: user exits, user exits, user exits. Okay, so the idea here is that this program will allow you to write your own user modules that run before it loads, user modules that run after it loads. You can write your own source code that would be executed here. So there's a concept in SAP called forward navigation. You will have to get used to not double clicking on things, because when you double click on things in the SAP development environment, it navigates you to that object, which is going to be at another part in the system. So I just double clicked on what was line 16, 17 or so. This include is reserved for user modification. PBO modules for sales document processing. The names of modification modules should begin with ZZ, and this is all commented. I could now, if I had appropriate permissions, go into change mode and type source code here. And then what would happen is when this particular program ran, when it hit line 20, it would run my program, and then it would continue on with the rest of the program as SAP wrote it. Yes, sir?
Is changing the sales order program considered modification?
That would be considered enhancement, because I'm not changing any of the SAP code, I'm adding to it. Now, the same thing that we said before is true, and that I have to be careful not to shoot myself in the foot. But the nice thing about this is, at least hypothetically, if I mess something up, I could just go in and delete the code that I wrote, and all the standard SAP code is still there. So this would be an example of specifically a user exit, but this would fall into the category of enhancement. Sometimes, although not often, we'll refer to things in your textbook. I don't know if you don't need to bring your textbook with you to class. There's a reading schedule for your textbook to make sure you stay on top of that. But this is from page 935 and 936 in your textbook, and I just wanted us to look at it here for a second, and I scrolled past it. User exits. User exits are one of the oldest enhancement techniques introduced by SAP. User exits are implemented as a call to a subroutine in which we can add custom code. Developer of standard program inserts a perform statement at a specific point in the program code that acts as a hook. And so that hook goes out and retrieves our code and runs it. The main reason why I wanted to show you this is something that your book goes on to say. All enhancement techniques other than user, no, that's not what I was looking for. They make a statement.
Asked that because when you clicked on it, it said modification stage, but it was actually an enhancement.
Run that by me again.
I was asking him about his question. His question was, would that be an enhancement, not a modification? Because when you clicked on it where you put the enhancements, it said something about modification. So,
I think, and this is where we have to be careful. In the source code, it might call it a modification, but it really is an enhancement because you're tacking something on to it. But yeah, it's kind of like the developer who wrote the documentation. He or she might have called it a modification, but they really weren't being precise in this. And you have to realize too, some of the code you're looking at was written at decades ago too, and a lot of things have changed there. I was looking for, there's a place here in your book where it basically went on to say, you can do, oh, here it is. SAP no longer provides user exits for new standard SAP programs, and many user exits have alternatives provided via modern enhancement techniques. So even in this, what you're seeing is there's a lot of these things like modifications and enhancements, user exits, that SAP has made available, but you're really cautioned against using them. But what you're not cautioned against using is customer development. Customer development is extremely common. This is where you go in, you write your own transactions, and you install them in the system. Let me give you an example of this. How many of you, and it should be all of you, but let me just check. How many of you have played ERP Sim? Okay. So do you remember when you were playing ERP Sim and you wanted to do advertising? You ran a traction called ZADS, and it gave you a grid that looked like a spreadsheet that you could type numbers in. That's not a standard SAP transaction. That was a transaction that was written solely for the ERP Sim game. By the time we're 6 weeks into this semester, you'd be able to write a transaction like that because all it does is present a grid to the user, let the user type numbers in, and when the user hits save, it updates a database table. Really, really trivial programming to do in ABAP. That was a customer-developed transaction to support the ERP Sim game. Now, a lot of the other transactions you ran, like running of MRP and looking at a variety of like price changes and other things of that sort, those were all standard transactions. But there were some transactions, and it was the ones that typically started with a Z for reasons that we'll talk about, that were actually written by the ERP Sim team to enhance gameplay and to make certain aspects of gameplay much, much easier. So kind of to wrap up this phase of our discussion here. So here's kind of your mindset. We need to do something. Can we accomplish what we need to do by way of configuration or personalization? And if so, we absolutely ought to do that. And I can't tell you, I've had this same discussion with 3 or 4 ABAP developers over the year where they said, yep, I just got finished with a project that I was assigned, and it took writing 5 lines of code. They said, but it took about 2 weeks of work for me to figure out where those 5 lines of code needed to go and what they needed to be. And then I've talked to people as well that have said, yeah, we were getting ready to go in and make a modification to the system or do a customer development, and somebody pointed out, because they read something online, that we could accomplish what we needed to do through configuration. And if you've taken the configuration course, you understand that that's pretty complex work. And there's a lot of things that the system might support out of the box that you didn't realize it supported out of the box. So sometimes what we have to do is really go and investigate, can I accomplish what I need to accomplish through configuration? And if I can, clearly that's the better way for me to go. But if I come to the conclusion I can't get there through configuration or personalization, is there something within the product that's similar to what I need? Well, then in that case, if there is, and the application allows me to add to it, then I could engage in enhancement. Got to be careful here, but enhancement is not bad if I'm not disrupting the core functionality that's already there. Well, maybe I can't do what I need to do through enhancement. Is there something in the underlying application that you need to change to meet your business need? And it's essential. What you really want to do then is consider the entire cost and long run effects. And this goes back to what Allison was saying a moment ago. Could we just tell our users to ignore something as opposed to going into the system and changing it? Because maybe going into the system and changing it, when all is said and done, is going to cost us $50,000 in labor. Whereas telling people to ignore something is free for the most part. So we want to look at things from the long run, consider the cost and benefits, and come to the conclusion that, yeah, this is something we really need to change, and it is worth it. Now, the other alternative is, if you need something that's different from what's already present, but you're not going to disrupt anything that's there, you're just adding to it, this is where customer development comes into play. And that's most of what ABAP developers find themselves doing in the current environment, and clearly what we will spend our time focusing on this semester. What this really does point to, however, is the importance of companies having a process for change management. There should be no one in your organization, regardless of how long they've been there or how senior they are, that could just go into your system and start making changes on his or her own. Everything we do in the system should be done with great purpose and should probably involve the discussion among multiple people and should involve some level of permission being granted before we start making any of these changes. Questions about any of this? All right, we're about to run out of time, but I do want to cover a few more things so that when we get together on Wednesday, we'll be ready to start looking at code. So let's talk about ABAP for a second. What is ABAP? Well, I don't know whether this is an abbreviation or an acronym or which of those two it is, but ABAP is a shortening of what you see there on the screen, which I will, if I attempt to pronounce it, will be horrible. Allgemeiner Bericht often blah 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 processor, which roughly is translated as generic report preparation generation processor. Okay, so you'll hear a lot of people today, and I love this because it's like such revisionist history, that say, oh, ABAP stands for Advanced Business Application Programming. Well, no, it doesn't. I mean, ABAP was created decades ago by people in Germany. What's the likelihood that people in Germany gave it an American name? You know, it doesn't make any sense at all. So, but nonetheless, it fits. So, you know, you'll hear people say that, but realize that's kind of a reimagining of history going on there. So, what is ABAP? Where did it come from? Why do we need it? Well, when SAP created their system, they realized they needed a language that would allow users to create custom reports. And so ABAP started out as that, a tool for creating custom reports. But as they continued to invest in ABAP as a development language, they realized that this could be a full programming language. And so they turned ABAP into a full Turing-complete programming language that makes it possible for you to write any kind of program you would like in ABAP. And they focused on that as being the program that would be used for customization, enhancement, customer development, and so on in SAP. ABAP has a number of really, really nice features to it. Maybe you have done some database programming in other programming languages. You know that when you do that, you often have to devote a significant block of code related to connecting to the database and managing the connection and disconnecting. Don't have to do any of that in ABAP because all of our databases are installed and managed by the system as logical database. So working with databases, you literally just drop a query in your source code. It could not be any easier. Embedded SQL statements, platform independence. The server that you are running on could be a Windows server, it could be a Linux server, it could be a few other flavors of operating system, and if you write your code right, ABAP's not going to care at all. It will run on any of those platforms. ABAP started out sometime in the 80s, as I mentioned earlier, as a procedural language. But in 1998, as object-oriented programming was really getting a lot of attention in the late 90s, ABAP was updated to support objects. And so that portion of the language was called ABAP objects. And so you can write object-oriented ABAP programming, or you can write legacy procedural coding. And there's demand for and need for both of those in different situations. You do all of your ABAP development in the SAP GUI. So there's no external IDE, there's no other resources that you use. You actually develop your code and use tools that are built into the ABAP workbench that is a part of the SAP GUI. One last thing we'll talk about and then we will go. I won't navigate to the SAP webpage, although I have given you the link here at the bottom of your slides. SAP is a software company. SAP sells products to companies, but SAP also makes an awful lot of money through training. And so what SAP will go to companies and do is they'll say, you know, when you hire new employees, send them to our training classes and we'll teach them how to work with our products. You can navigate through the link that I have here to various facets of SAP training. Ultimately, you will find yourself looking at a tree related to classes that you could take to learn how to program SAP. And there's SAP Tech, which is a 3-day course, which is just what is SAP. BC 100 is intended to be a programming course for people who have never done any programming before. Then you have BC 400, BC 401. These are all kind of the guts of the SAP training course. If you took every course on this screen right here, the cost to your company would be over $100,000. This course covers a substantial chunk of BC 401, BC 403, somewhere in my resources in a later discussion. We cover really all of BC 100, BC 400, BC 401, which is ABAP objects, BC 402, BC 430. We will cover that material in this course. Now, we will not cover it by way of SAP official resources, but we will cover it using things that I have developed that run parallel to those courses. We have some of our graduates that actually teach these courses on site at various companies in the region to new hires based on the things that we've covered in these classes. Last time I looked, BC 400, just that one course was close to $10,000. You will learn everything that was in that that's in that course in this class this semester. Okay, so the nice thing about this is, and what a lot of our employees have told companies in the past is, you know, you could hire Jim Bob over there, who's a really nice guy, but because he's never programmed an ABAP before, he's got to start way back here. Or I already know all of this stuff, so you can just send me to the more advanced courses, which is in fact what a lot of companies have done to kind of layer on top of what we cover in this class additional things that would be useful. I want to emphasize we are not using the official SAP curriculum for two reasons. Number one, it's copyrighted by SAP, and so we're not authorized to do it. And number two, it's not very good in a lot of places. It's really, really confusing. And so hopefully the material that I have put together you will find to be a little bit more understanding. But the really crazy thing is, everything we do this semester, if you wanted to take this from SAP, your company would probably send you to BC 401 or BC 400 and 401, which would be 10 days. And you would meet for 8 hours a day for 10 days and then have homework every evening. So what we're doing in this class is spreading that out over a whole semester as opposed to you doing that many hours as intensely. So I think you're actually more apt to actually retain it the way we will cover it as well, as opposed to the way SAP goes about training it in these kind of 8 hour a day death march scenarios. Okay? All right, well, we are out of time for today. I'll see you guys when we get together on Wednesday. Have a great rest day. If you came in after I called roll, will you please come up and let me know that you're here so that I can put you down?
Number 3.